Hello and welcome to my channel. This is the South Landing Lifeboat Station in Flamborough, UK, and like many lifeboat stations, they're underfunded and underappreciated. So I thought I'd show my appreciation by building a scale model of the station and the lifeboat. I found a company called Dragon Badger Models on eBay, and they 3D printed some of the items I was looking for. So I ordered these kits so I can make a start of the project. The scale that I'm going with is 1 in 72, and I'm going to start off with the lifeboat itself. The print resolution for these items is quite low, so I'm going to have to do a lot of touch-up work, and that means a lot of sanding, filing and filling. I'm gluing these outboard motors together with plastic cement, as I'm hoping they will weld together for a stronger bond, and to help ensure that it does, I'm going to use some clamps to hold it into place. This is always good practice to help increase your chances of success. There's a lot of big holes to fill in, so I'll get out my usual modelling putty, and with a wet finger I'll push it into all the gaps and crevices. The boat has a bottom section that needs attaching. If it's only going to be used on the surface of the water, you can skip this part, but because I'm going to display it on the trailer, I need this on, and once again I'm using a little bit of force to hold it into place. And now comes all that filing and sanding to make everything neat. This is an arduous process, but it needs to be done. I did think about remaking some of these elements from scratch, but I wasn't sure if it would save me enough time. The boat gets the same treatment as the motors, filling and sanding, except this time some of the gaps are much bigger. And then that needs a good sanding to smooth it down. I find these sanding sticks to be very effective. And then once I'm ready, I can add some filler primer, and this will help fill in the even smaller gaps. And then we go through the sanding process once more. This is all repetitive but very essential. And then finally we can move on to the painting stage. Some of the darker items like the jets only need one coat, while the bright orange of the boat require 5 or 6 coats. There's a very neat black stripe running down the side, so the best way to replicate this is by using masking tape. I didn't do a perfect job, but all I need is a little bit of touch up. But for the other markings I just use a black paint pen, as this is more accurate than a paintbrush. And once that's finished, I glue on all the accessories. Now it's starting to look like the real thing. I could always take it a step further if I choose by adding more equipment, but later in this build I will be adding people, and that will help set the scale. And now I'm going to make a start on the trailer. I just need to separate everything from the base plate. I just have to take extreme care because I don't want to break anything. This trailer is a completely different make and model to what's used at this station, so I will be amending it to make it look a little bit more similar. So in the end it's going to be a bit of a hybrid, whereas this one has tracks and the actual one has wheels. Right, we've seen this process before, just a matter of priming, sanding and painting, as well as attaching all the different components. And once it's mostly built, I can take stock and decide what I want to do with the modifications. And first of all, I need to make the trailer a lot shorter. So using my Japanese wood saw, I chop off about 20mm at the back. I'm also mindful that the join isn't noticeable when it's finished. So as you can see here, the two halves will fit together nicely. The boat should also be overhanging at the front, so I chop off the front end. And now it looks like it was designed to fit this trailer. But there's still some more alterations I need to make. In the photo it has a metal cage along either side, so that needs replicating. So I'll draw out the design on a thin piece of styrene and cut it out. Then it's just a matter of marking out where the bars are going to go and cutting them out. For the individual bars, I cut them to shape and slot them into place. And all it needs now is a drop of super glue to keep them there. Next I dry fit it to make sure it fits. Then it's just a matter of painting it silver, then adding on the black and orange highlight. The third item we're going to tackle is the beach tractor. This is not the type which is used at Flamborough, but it is the type used up and down the coast at other beaches. Plus it's the only one I can get my hands on, so I'll have to do. I had a difficult time removing these parts from the support pieces, which means there's going to be a lot of clean up. It's pretty much the same process as you've seen before, so I'm going to speed through it. These parts first of all need welding together, and then the seam lines need filing flat. And then it's a matter of filling in all the crevices with some putty, and then sand, prime and repeat, and then paint and then assemble. The instructions are fairly vague, so I'm taking my time making sure I get it right. The layer lines are pretty obvious on this model, so I'm hoping the filler primer will help reduce them. I also had to use a lot of green stuff to reconstruct this cabin, as the print quality was terrible. But after a lot of hard work, this is what I ended up with. It would have been nice if we could fit some plastic in there to represent the windows, but I'm afraid they'd look too wonky, so it would better leave them out. And now for something completely different. I've taken measurements from the front and the side of the building with the most detail on and scaled them down in this blueprint. And this is going to be the jumping off point for the rest of the building. Next, I cut down to size some 5mm PVC board, and then I transfer all my drawings onto them. I leave some overhang at the bottom, this is so I can slot it into the base. When I lay the pieces on top of each other, it should match perfectly now. As for the roof, I'll work out those measurements later, but otherwise these are all my main pieces laid out. And I've roughly assembled them, so see what it looks like in 3D. And now to work on the base. I've got my hand on some model foam, but these need joining together. And for this I'm using PVA glue, but the wooden sticks help give it strength. And it's just a matter of leaving it for a few hours until it completely bonds. Then I can cut it down to its final size. Using a pencil, I'll mark out where all the pieces are going to go. These are going to be cut out so the wall can be slotted into place. This is my first time working with this material and it's surprisingly robust. I cut out what I can with a knife and then I use a tool to pull out the remaining pieces. I need these grooves to be quite deep because this building is actually on a slope, and I'm going to replicate that in this model. All the building pieces have been slotted into place for now, so I know that all the measurements are correct and they fit. Plus I've also cut out the groove for the side wall and I'm just giving them a test fit. Behind this wall is going to be a steep grass verge, so I use some of the foam offcuts to represent that. These will eventually be covered in earth and grass. The wall pieces could do with some detail. Luckily I had this fancy little roller which has a big pattern on it, so if I press down hard enough and go in a straight line, I ended up with a brick wall. Although I'm not quite sure how easy it is to see on here. All the walls are glued into place to become a permanent fixture, and I will paint them at a later stage. Now I have to start cutting into the foam and create the gradients. This is a messy process and not very neat and tidy. Although sanding does help with the fine tuning, I am left with some gaps which need filling in. I have the two-part epoxy scoop which I've never used before, although it works in the same way as milliput and green stuff. Mix both halves together and you're good to go. So I'll push it into all the cracks and crevices, then wet my finger and blend it in even more. And once it's dried, it can be sanded again. This can be a tedious process, but we are slowly inching towards our goals. I've got some further details to add, such as this manhole cover. So all I did was create a little indent in the foam and then slot into place the piece I've made. There's also some raised curb at the beginning of the ramp, so I'll get them made and glued into place. Altogether, all these little details will add up and help sell the scene. Now I'm ready to cover the entire piece with some watered down PVA glue. This will soak into the foam and help seal it. And then I can have my white base layer. And I'll probably need a couple of coats of this. As you can see, I'm dabbing the paint on. This both creates a random texture and gets rid of your brush strokes. Next I can start adding on the base colours. This doesn't need to be too accurate initially, as once I've added the dry brushing, the washers, the weathering, it will be a different colour. As you can see now, I'm adding the weathering patch to the back wall. As this area is off limits, it needs to be really dirty and grimy. And for the soil behind the wall, I apply the base layer, then I stipple on a variety of different colours. And once again, this doesn't need to be too accurate, as it will be covered up with some grass. Since the interior of the garage will be visible, I paint on the floor bluish grey, and then I turn my attention to the exterior. The ramp appears to be made out of concrete and the rest of the area is tarmacked. Stippling it with the black wash ages it nicely, but any excess will need to be dabbed off with a tissue. Once the diorama is near completion, I will add some further weathering, but for now this will be fine. Next, I'm laying down some masking tape so I can create some double yellow lines. I've never actually tried this before, so I'm looking forward to seeing the results. Since the lines are heavily worn and broken in reality, I stipple them on randomly, and then once the paint has solidified, I pull off the tape. I think that's come out quite nicely, and if I choose to I can damage the lines further by adding more paint. The next task is to make the metal cages down the side, and for that I'm going to be using this plastic mesh and this 1mm thick styrene, which is cut into thin strips and glued on with super glue, and it's just a matter of following the pattern until it's all in place, and then any excess mesh can be trimmed off. Now I just have the larger and more complicated one to make, but at least I now know what I'm doing. And once I've made the electrical box and painted it all up, this is what it looks like. Basically old and weathered. I can't put these into place just yet. That will have to wait until I've completed that whole side of the building. Next on the agenda is the interior of the garage. I've sketched out the basics for now. I just need to make a few bits and pieces and get it painted. It should be fairly quick and straightforward. This door, for example, is sunken into the wall by a couple of inches, and since I'm not going to line it up with the outside wall, I'm going to show you my cheat for it. So it's just a matter of cutting it out, cleaning it up, and basically gluing a piece of card behind it. And once it's painted, it should match the real door. Right, we're going to get the painting done next before I attach all the little bits and pieces. Their stripes would go all the way around this room, and the most accurate way of applying those is with masking tape, as it leaves you with a nice straight edge. Plus, it's also quite satisfying when you peel them off. There will always be a little bit of touch-up work, but it's still better than doing the whole thing manually. Next, I paint all the doors to match the colour of the lower wall. Then it's just a matter of gluing into place the fire extinguishers and the concrete columns. I've chosen not to add too much detail to this garage, and that's because once the vehicles are in place, you'll hardly see anything past them. And the next step is to glue this to the main board. Where possible, I'll glue some blocks into place behind these walls for extra support. And that's the basics of the garage done. And as you can see from the ground view, it's not looking half bad. And now it's time to crack on with the exterior walls. First I cut out and remove all necessary doors and windows. And now for the stage that I've been putting off. I'm going to be laying down the brick pattern. So just like with my side wall, I'm heating up the PVC plastic and then rolling on my brick texture. Many things can go on with this process, so I just have to be slow and steady. In the areas where the bricks haven't formed correctly, I use this hard edge tool and simply push the line into existence. After doing that for many hours, I can finally start making the decorational pieces at the top of the building. These are made out of brick, but they stick out just a little bit, and they're going to wrap around the top edge of the building like this. I've also overlapped the edges to help disguise the seam. I've also rolled on the brick impression to match the rest of the brickwork, and then all these pieces are glued into place with super glue. Off camera I get all these walls primed, then we can make a start with painting on the brickwork. I went ahead and picked a rusty orange for the base colour, and basically covered all the bricked areas. Bricks on buildings are very rarely uniform in colour, so I selected a variety of colours which are similar in red and brown pigments, and I basically select and paint several individual bricks. This is a very long and mind-numbing process, but it has to be done if you want your building to look a little bit realistic. As the layers slowly build up, the brick formation starts to look a bit more organic, so I'm going to spend the next couple of days adding a lot more variety. I find shining a torch at one angle helps to highlight the bricks, especially as some of the indentations are quite shallow. I just have another couple more colour variations to add, then I can seal all this in and move on to the next step. I dab on a watered down rusty orange all over everything, and this will help to unify the brick colours. Then I use the tissue to dab off all the excess. And now for the scary part, adding the grouting. I've not done this before, so I'm not sure how well it's going to work. So I'm using some actual grout and using a rubber squeezy, I squeeze it into all the cracks. And once I've allowed it time to dry, I wipe over it with a wet sponge. You can't go too heavy with this, otherwise you remove all the grout, but you will need to do several light passes. For the next step you need to add a great wash, and this will age everything up, and a damp sponge will help lighten it where it's needed. As the main task now is to try and make all the walls uniform. Then moving on to the small garage door, I use the original offcut. I carefully score on the ridges all the way down. Then it's just a matter of painting it in brown and then spraying it with a gloss lacquer for that shiny effect. Next I move on to the doors. Once again I use the original offcuts. This time I use the 1mm bead to make the door frame. This is the fire door at the back and the 3 doors at the front. The details are slightly different on each, as well as different colours. I also give them a spray of some lacquer for that extra shine. Once they are pushed into place, they are glued from the back to secure them. I've got some additional detail to add to the shed, and I'm going to start building that first. First I have a sticker to add above the garage door, and this represents the various plaques on the actual building. Out of 1mm styrene, I've cut out this ventilation cover. I also made a couple of cameras for the actual garage. At this scale they don't need to be super detailed. I also got hold of a styrene rod, which I'm going to paint black and use as a drain pipe. This will need to bend around to the back of the building where it disappears into the undergrowth. And using some right angled metal blocks, I can start gluing the building together. I will also reinforce the inside of the seam for extra strength. I can now slot the back wall into place on the diorama, followed by the garage. As you can see, I've reinforced the inside for extra strength. Once those have been glued into place, I measure out the roof on some 1mm styrene. I then painstakingly draw on all the tiles, making sure they overlap, and then using a blade I score between each tile. This is a time-consuming process, but it really does help sell the scale. I then prime it and paint it a German grey, also making sure some of the tiles are slightly different colour. I dry brush on some white, representing some water damage, and then using some green pigment I can add on the stains where the foliage has been. Then once everything's sealed, I can slot it into place. As you can see, I've added some tabs underneath, and that guarantees perfect alignment. You can't tell very well from this angle, but I'm using some fillers to fill in the gap between the building and the base. Then I'm going to use some grey paint to blend it in. After that I continue working on the back wall, which is adjacent to the cliff. It's mostly done, I just need to add a few more details. And now it can be glued into place. We've already made the cages plus the gas equipment for the back. Now I'm going to start adding all the foliage. And I have quite a lot of different products available for that. I have vines, leaves, grass, bracken, plant and all sorts. It's just a matter of mixing and matching everything and blending it all in. I also put some leaves down the side of the building where they naturally gather, and this will help hide the seams. Everything is stuck together with PVA glue so it dries solid and clear. And then at long last I can super glue my cages into place, and there's nothing more satisfying than a long way to pay off. And now I can add some vines and other foliage to the back shed. This area in real life is quite overgrown, so all I need to do is try and represent that. Once the PVA glue dries, everything will be stuck into place. I do have some touch-up work to do, but otherwise this side is complete. Right, it's time to work on the focal point, which is the front, and there's quite a lot of detail to add for this section. I have this outcrop to make, these roller shutter windows, plus several supports on the garage door itself, along with the folded up garage door. And once each piece has been made, I carefully glue them into place. I've also printed out a bunch of stickers for the signage, posters and other items. I also made some of the exterior lights. They ended up being slightly oversized, but I don't think anybody will notice. As the smaller you make items, the harder they are to make. And for the centrepiece itself, I built the first floor extension. Next, I just need to get it painted and weathered, and then it's just a matter of cutting down some clear perspex for the windows. And those are held into place with some PVA glue. I also painted on some miniature stickers and added a white backdrop so you can't see through it. And now that can be glued into place. So that's another wall which can be added to the others. I follow the same process as before, gluing it into place, filling in the gaps and so forth. I picked up these 3D printed park benches They're from a company called Tinker's Models, and I'm only going to need the one, and once it's painted I can glue it into place. There's also a second bench which is much simpler, but I had to make it from scratch. It's got wonky legs because it sits on a slope. After adding on the drain pipes, this is where we're at, and I think it's starting to look like a real thing now. But there's a big gaping hole to one side, so let's do something about it. So I've already done the doors and lights, so that gives me a little bit of a head start. Next I added all the posters and cut out the vents. Then I added the shutters, the window and a few other bits and pieces. There's still a couple of drain pipes left to add, but they can't be glued into place until the walls first been added. And while I'm here, I've painted the edge of the foam black. This will neaten up the edges when it goes on display. Now I can crack on with the roof, and that means drawing on all the slates, and you can see roughly how it's going to look when it's assembled. But first I need to score all the lines for the slate. This is a very repetitive process and time consuming, but it's also an essential step. There are also 5 windows on the roof, so I'll carve them out. I've attached both halves of my roof together. This might look a mess to you, but this will all help align it to the building. And to top it off, I'm going to glue on the centre strip. Now I just need to paint it and add on the windows. I used the same grade to match the smaller side roof, and then I used a variety of different weathering techniques to try and match the photograph. There's a lot of green and yellow splotches which represent where the leaves are stained. Then once the windows have been added, the roof looks something like this. I've kept it detachable so I've got access to the inside, and this allows me to install a light. This is just a tea light which has been installed upside down, so you don't need the skills of an electrician to achieve this. And this allows me to see the detail on the inside. Please note you won't actually see it from this angle, so you won't actually see the ceiling. Now here's the completed images so far. There's a few additional items to add, so let's get cracking with them. So I've made this little arcade machine from scratch and glued that in place. There's also a railing all the way down one side, so drill holes for those. The only way I can achieve this is making it one rail at a time, so it's going to be a tedious process. The vertical pieces are all being cut to the same length, and these are pushed into place with a drop of glue at the bottom. The trick is trying to keep them the same length. I do the best that I can to get all the horizontal bars level. This is a seemingly impossible task, so I get as close as I can. Then I paint them silver and start adding on additional details, such as this sign. I managed to find a grip bin on eBay, so that's one less thing I needed to build. Unlike this sign which I had to make from scratch, I managed to find this figure to represent my dad, and I got him painted up. He'll be happy with it because I've knocked 20 years off him, so now he'll be permanently associated with this place. I also found some lifeboat crew figures, so I picked out the ones I wanted to use and got them painted up. Then it's just a matter of gluing them all into place. And that's it. After 6 or 7 months, this is completely finished. So let's move on to the final reveal shots. There's a reason why I've made everything the size that it is, because this is eventually going to live in a fish tank. That tank is going to be turned upside down and used as a display case. And with a little bit of luck, it will go to live in the big version of this building, where anyone can pop down and see for themselves. And this is at the South Landing in Flamborough. I couldn't have completed this project without my dad's help. He took the photos of every inch of this building so that I could replicate it. And it's amazing what hidden details are found by just changing the angle a little bit. So what do you guys think of it? Do you think it's a fair representation of the real thing? Is there another building I should replicate? Let me know in the comment below. But for now, I've earned a rest. Thank you for watching. Don't forget, if I can do it, so can you.